Today I'm going to be ranking all 4 Daniel Craig James Bond films from worst to best. Let's get into it. Hello folks, and welcome back to another video. So like I said, in this video I'm going to be ranking all of the Daniel Craig James Bond films from worst to best. Now, like I always say, this is a very opinionative based video, so if you don't agree with me, or if you do agree with me, let me know in the comments below. Tell me what your favorite Daniel Craig Bond film is. Tell me what your least favorite Daniel Craig Bond film is, and if you feel so inclined to, just rank all 4 of them in the comment section below. I would like to know all of your guys' thoughts. So this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while with the lead up to the release of No Time to Die, but of course, with all of the coronavirus stuff going on, so many movies, including No Time to Die, have gotten pushed back. No Time to Die, in particularly, pushed back to February 25th, but that isn't going to stop us. I still wanted to get this video out there for you guys and give you guys my thoughts on the 4 Daniel Craig James Bond films. Now, as it relates to Daniel Craig James Bond films, I have ranked all of the theme songs from his movies. Now I'm going to be ranking the movies themselves, and I'm very excited to do this. I've seen each of these movies several times, so I have a pretty good hold on where I think these movies should belong. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Coming in at my number 4 spot as my least favorite Daniel Craig James Bond film, I have Quantum of Solace. Now, this is a film... I don't hate Quantum of Solace. I don't hate any of Daniel Craig's James Bond films, but this is definitely the one that is probably the most frustrating to me because it has an interesting plot, and it's coming hot off one of the best James Bond films in history, Casino Royale. So it has a lot to live up to, and it comes directly off of course, the events that took place in Casino Royale, and it kind of just, it falls right into its storyline. Really, this movie, in a lot of aspects, should be a good film. However, there are some things that are very, very frustrating about this movie. For me, the most frustrating part of Quantum of Solace is the filmmaking. Particularly the jump cuts that we see a lot with the action sequences in Quantum of Solace. And if you don't know what I'm referring to by jump cuts, if you've seen Quantum of Solace, think to the car chase scene that we get in the first act of the movie. It gives me a headache. It really does. Whenever I go back and watch Quantum of Solace, I'm reminded when I watch that scene of why I don't like this movie nearly as much as the others. Because with those jump cut action sequences, I can't keep track of what's going on. Like, I don't know where certain people are in relation to each other because it just cuts here, cuts there, cuts here, cuts there. It's almost like they were trying to go for like a Jason Bourne vibe, because one thing that the Jason Bourne movies are known for is jump cuts in their action sequences. But, and even the Jason Bourne films, it kind of irritates me in those movies. I wish they wouldn't do jump cuts, but it just doesn't work in Quantum of Solace. I felt like the action sequences in Casino Royale, the way they were filmed, was so much better. This is, of course, a new director, so clearly you can tell the filmmaking styles are different. He was going for a very different thing than Casino Royale director was going for. I just don't like him, and that's by far my least favorite part of Quantum of Solace. Another thing is the plot and the characters are very forgettable. I know that the main villain's name is Dominic Green, and he's okay. He's not bad by any means, but he's just not a memorable character. There are so many other great characters in these James Bond movies that stacked up, with him stacked up against some of the other villains that we get in the Daniel Craig Bond movies, it's no comparison. Compared to them, he's a very forgettable villain, in my opinion. And I cannot remember the name of the Bond girl. I'll put her name up, but she's, again, forgettable. Like, I can't even remember her name. That's how forgettable she is. She's okay from what I can remember. She's nothing special. Now, again, like I said, I don't hate Quantum of Solace. There is one action scene in particular that happens early on in the movie where James Bond is breaking into this guy's apartment, and a pretty cool fight scene takes place. And I actually don't mind it. It's by far the best action sequence in the entire film. But compared to all of the others, it's by far the best. All of the others, I just don't like them. It's kind of weird how you have this one great action sequence, all of the rest just compared to it are very bad. So again, I don't hate Quantum of Solace. Like I said, the plot's forgettable, but the plot isn't bad. I mean, there's been worse. There's definitely been worse. So it's not a horrible James Bond film, but stacked up against Craig's others, it's definitely my least favorite by far. All right, so let's move on to my number 3 spot. Now, coming in at number 3 for me is Spectre. Now, the gap for me is pretty big between Quantum of Solace and Spectre. There are a lot of people who would put Spectre as their least favorite. Some people would put it where I would put it, and I've seen some people rank this film pretty high. This seems to be a fairly divisive film. Some people consider it underrated. Some people consider it not good. A lot of people consider, not a lot, but some people consider it Craig's worst. For me, it's kind of middle of the pack, but I do think it is quite a bit better than Quantum of Solace. In terms of the biggest criticism that I have for this movie, there is one certain aspect, or one certain plot point in particular that is pretty big, and it's supposed to have this very emotional payoff, but the way it's executed for me, it involves Blofeld. Who is played by Christoph Waltz. Christoph Waltz, as an actor, he's great. I actually think he plays the character of Blofeld pretty great, but he doesn't have a lot to work with. And the way that this particular plot point is executed is very, very disappointing. It's by far my least favorite part of this movie. You can tell that they were going for something very grand, very emotionally satisfying, and very emotionally impactful. And they just didn't stick the landing. It just didn't work. I didn't really feel anything when this big reveal happened in the third act. So for me, it didn't pay off the dynamic that they created between Blofeld and Bond. Also, Andrew Scott plays a role in this film. He plays not the main villain. The main villain is Blofeld. He plays kind of a side villain, kind of an obstacle in Bond's way to the ultimate goal, if that makes sense. He's just kind of a pain in the side of Bond in this movie, and I thought he was fine. I like Andrew Scott as an actor. You know, I thought he played the role well, but kind of forgettable. But he's not supposed to be an extremely memorable role by any means. So I didn't mind his character. Now, the reason that Spectre and Quantum of Solace, the reason there's such a wide gap between these movies is because Spectre does a really, really good job at what Quantum of Solace does a really, really bad job at, and that's its filmmaking. Sam Mendes, even though this film's plot is a little bit mediocre, the filmmaking is great. There's really great visuals. The opening sequence in this movie, the Day of the Dead, Bond walking on top of the rooftops, the helicopter sequence that follows, it's just, it's beautiful. I mean, the visuals are incredible. They're jaw-dropping, and the directing is great. The action sequences, which I will mention a little bit later, are great. So filmmaking is probably the best part of this movie. The plot's a little bit mediocre. The execution isn't very well with some of the characters and their development and the plot points. However, the filmmaking is what really stands out for Spectre. The action sequences, one in particular, the helicopter action sequence, I mean, I'll admit, it's nothing great. I mean, we've obviously seen better. The construction site action sequence that we get in Casino Royale, where they're at the top, where they're like really high up on that beam. I mean, if you compare the helicopter sequence to that, it's really no comparison, but it's still very well filmed, and I was still kind of on the edge of my seat while watching it. But the one action sequence that really stands out is the train sequence that we see between Bond and Dave Bautista's character. Wow. I mean, that's like that really was an exceptional action sequence. That really stands out. When I think of Skyfall, or excuse me, when I think of Spectre, that's what my mind goes to right away. I just think of that train sequence. It's really good. So I really enjoy it quite a bit. In terms of the Bond girl, we of course get introduced to Madeline Swan, who will also be returning to No Time to Die, as we know by the trailers. And I think she's pretty good. She's not the best, you know, she's no Vesper Lynn, but she's good. I like her. So I feel like I said, Spectre's kind of the middle of the pack, but it does a lot of things. Well, I should say it does one thing in particular very well. One thing it does not very good. Everything else it does okay. It's a pretty mediocre film, but it's quite a bit better than Quantum of Solace, in my opinion. All right, so let's move on to my number 2 spot. And coming in at number 2 as my runner-up for my favorite Daniel Craig James Bond film, it is Skyfall. Okay, so Spectre did a better job, or excuse me, Spectre did the best job at what Quantum of Solace did the worst job at. Skyfall does the best job at what Spectre does the worst job at, and that is plot. Skyfall has an incredible plot. An incredible plot. One thing that stands out for me, I love how involved M is in this movie. Judi Dench's M. She's very involved in this film, like we've never seen before. Now, I haven't seen all of the old Bond films, but I don't think it's too far to say, even though I haven't seen them, that this is probably the Bond film where the M character has been the most involved. I mean, she is an integral part of this story. Her and the main villain in this film have a direct connection, and then Bond almost plays this middleman. So I love how involved Judi Dench's M is in this film. It creates such a cool, unique situation that we've really never seen before. It's really, really cool. And that leads into the whole idea of this film being so much more personal, so much more character-driven, so much more grounded. I mean, you know, it just feels so much more emotional. One of my favorite parts of this film, the plot is incredible, and this goes into that. One of my favorite parts of this film is the fact that we really get to see this dynamic between James Bond and M like we've never seen before. We really get a deep dive into their relationship. They have this interesting relationship, almost kind of mother and son-ish. She definitely plays this parenting figure to him, where she kind of has this tough love approach to him, as we see in the first act of this film. I just love that we really get to go deep into this study of the relationship between M and James Bond, and they're with each other a lot, especially in the third act. And that's one reason I should say why this film is so intriguing from beginning to end, is that there's always something to keep you intrigued. There's always something to keep your attention into this film, because even the slower parts of this movie, and the slower parts being when James Bond and M are together, or they're on the run, they're going somewhere, or they're just talking to each other. Even those slower parts are so intriguing because their relationship is so interesting. Got to talk about Javier Bardem. He blows it out of the park. I mean, he really does an amazing job in this movie. I was talking earlier about villains and how Quantum of Solace had a pretty mediocre villain in Dominic Green. Skyfall has an exceptional villain. I mean, he does a great job. When we talk about villains, one thing that we always look for is that even though they're evil, and even though we know they're evil, and even though we know we're not supposed to like them, one thing that's so intriguing about great villains is when you can kind of understand their motives. Javier Bardem's character felt betrayed by M. So clearly he's on this revenge mission. But at the same time, so you can understand why he is the way he is, because he kind of went through hell. You know, he used to work for M, and she like traded him off or something, and he felt betrayed, and now he's on this revenge mission. But at the same time, you understand why M did what she did. So you understand both sides of it, and that creates such a cool dynamic. within this film. Just like with Spectre, and this movie is also directed by Sam Mendes, so this shouldn't come as any surprise, but the filmmaking is great. Nothing bad to say about the filmmaking. It's great, along with the plot, along with a great villain, along with a great character study with James Bond and M. The filmmaking as a whole is great. We get great visuals in this film as well, and I also love that we really also get to see the relationship between James Bond and Moneypenny fleshed out a little bit more. That is really interesting. So really, we get to see these characters interact to an extent that we've never seen before. We've never seen Moneypenny and James Bond interact so closely together ever. I mean, this movie really takes a deep dive into these characters, and it's so interesting. And the last thing I have to say about Skyfall, it's just so rewatchable. Like if I am thinking of a Bond movie that I can just stick in and watch and not really have to worry about, oh, am I gonna get kind of bored of it? You know, Skyfall is easily my go-to. Like, I know that if I start watching this movie, I'm gonna finish it because it's that rewatchable. It's just this. It never really gets old. It ages very well. And even though it isn't a perfect movie, even though maybe there are some pacing issues in this movie, and some people criticize the third act because it has this like Home Alone, feel to it. Even though it's not perfect, and even though it's not quite as good as Casino Royale, it still has this rewatchability that's really hard to argue. Before I go into my number one spot, I just want to remind you guys real quick, if you haven't pressed that red subscribe button, please do so if you want more movie-related content such as this, and also hit that notification bell if you want to be notified by any of my new uploads. But, with that aside, coming in at number one, ladies and gentlemen, as you could probably tell by process of elimination, is Casino Royale. Ugh. This is almost, it's a perfect James Bond film, honestly. I mean, obviously no movie's perfect, but this is about as close as you're gonna get to a perfect James Bond film. Casino Royale is so great. And what a way to kick off Daniel Craig's reign as James Bond, especially considering that there was so much criticism behind the decision to make Daniel Craig the next James Bond, and he shut the critics up with this film. This is an incredible movie. I believe it's directed by Mark Campbell. I think it is, but if I'm wrong, I'll change that. But like I said, what a way to kick things off, especially with a very memorable Daniel Craig Bond introduction. You know, we always get those classic, pre-credit sequences with these James Bond films, and this one is very unique because it starts out in black and white. So if you're watching this for the first time and this is your first Daniel Craig James Bond film that you've seen, you're probably thinking, what in the hell is going on? Why is the screen black and white? What is this? I've never seen this before. Yeah, it's very unique. It's very interesting. And at the beginning of this movie, we find out that Daniel Craig's Bond character is so close to earning his 00 status, he just needs to kill one more person, and that person happens to be the person he's interrogating at the beginning of this movie. We are also treated to a very brutal action sequence at the beginning of this movie of Daniel Craig's Bond getting his first kill. And right away, if this is your first Bond movie that you've seen from Craig, you realize right away what the approach is for this new era of Bond. Gritty, realistic. I mean, this movie definitely goes for the gritty, no questions asked, realistic vibe. This isn't, fun, playful, James Bond of the past. This James Bond is a bit of a badass, and he's not afraid to show you. So this definitely takes a U-turn from maybe what some people were expecting from this, or from what we've seen in the past from James Bond. And I love that just the pre-credit sequence alone is able to convey that. Also, I mean, if again we go back to the whole villain things, some of the best James Bond movies have some of the best villains, and I think that's one common denominator we see with the great James Bond movies is the villains. The villains are great. In this case, it's Mads Mikkelsen's character playing the villain of Le Chiffre, and he is such an interesting character. He really is. He's he's not like extremely evil. He's just kind of a pest, which is kind of interesting. Like, he's not made out to be this like really evil, like intimidating character. He's just kind of a pest that just kind of sticks his head where it doesn't belong, and he gets in trouble as a result. And he plays that character very well. So Mads Mikkelsen does a great job with Le Chiffre. He's definitely one of the most memorable James Bond characters, aside Javier Bardem's. And you can't talk about Casino Royale without talking about the poker aspect of things. Now, I'm going to speak for myself when I say I don't know how the game of poker is played. I don't know what's a good hand, what's not a good hand. I don't really know how the game is structured and how everything is just organized and played. But somehow, for someone like me who knows nothing about poker, the poker sequences in this movie are so intense and so edge of your seat and so captivating. And they find a way to do that, even for people who don't really know anything about poker like me. And they do this through facial expressions, through body language, and that's very, very skillful. I mean, from a directing standpoint, from an acting standpoint, the fact that they're able to make these poker sequences where literally they're just sitting down and playing a game. It's not like anybody's fighting anybody. We're not like doing crazy helicopter parkour construction site. No, this is just a poker game. It's just a poker game. It's crazy what they're able to do with that. And then I know I'm kind of going out of order here, but let's talk about the construction site chase scene / fight scene that we get in the first act. If you've seen Casino Royale, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, can you get better than that? It's just crazy, and it goes on for so long, but it flies by because it's such a good action sequence. It's so well directed. And again, I'm just going to go back to it. There are no jump cuts. We don't get crazy headache-inducing, where is everything at? I don't know where Bond is. I don't know where the guy he's chasing is. It's not an action sequence that's filled with jump cuts, because it doesn't need jump cuts to create chaos or to create intensity or anxiety. It does that through its sheer raw filmmaking and its ability by the actors and the stuntmen to do what they do with the sequence. It's just such a captivating sequence, and if you haven't seen the construction site sequence in Casino Royale, if you haven't seen Casino Royale, you need to check it out, and you need to really pay attention to that sequence, because it is one of the best action sequences I've ever seen in history. And I mean, of course, I love the part where James Bond, he literally just runs through a wall. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you will. Anyways, so yeah, it's the action is so well choreographed. And then, yep, of course, we have to talk about Vesper Lynd. I mean, oh my gosh, she's a great Bond girl. Definitely the best out of all of Daniel Craig's Bond films. She's just really interesting. You can tell that their relationship and that their romance is very genuine. There's nothing fake about it. It's just so genuine and down to earth, and that's what I love. And we really, like I said, this is clearly a very, very intense portrayal of Bond, a very gritty, realistic, but at the same time, it's a very human portrayal. This movie's not afraid to give you a look into some of the demons that this character is battling, and we get some really, really great sequences of. I think it happens when Bond he kills somebody with the help of Vesper, and he goes to the bathroom and he's just washing the blood off of his face, and he's washing his hands of the blood, and and then he takes a big swig of alcohol, and we really get a look into this character's demons and his internal struggles. It's very interesting. And then the sequence where we really get a look into Bond and Vesper and their relationship and how very real it is. It's that sequence where they're both in the shower, they're sitting in the shower, and she feels so guilty for contributing to someone being killed, to someone's death. And Bond is there to comfort her, and he licks her fingers, which when you think back to it, it's a little awkward, but in the moment, it's very romantic, I guess. And again, if you haven't seen Casino Royale, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I mean, everything that they set up in this movie pays off in the end. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, one thing I will say, because like I brought up the point about how Skyfall is a really rewatchable Bond film, I would say that Casino Royale isn't quite as rewatchable. I think it's because it is longer, I believe, and it definitely feels longer. Definitely feels like a longer movie. So I would say that Casino Royale isn't as rewatchable as Skyfall, but as a movie, if we're just talking about quality, it's definitely closer to that perfect title than Skyfall is. But they're both incredible Bond movies. They really are. I mean, these two I could just watch and they never get old. So yeah, I just love them both. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I tried my best to keep this brief, but when I start talking about James Bond, I tend to just keep talking about James Bond. But anyways, guys, thank you so much. Just as a quick reminder, hit that red subscribe button if you haven't already, plus the notification bell. Comment in the comment section below. What is your favorite James Bond film? What is your least favorite James Bond film? And just go ahead and rank them all in the comment section below, because I would love to know your guys' thoughts. Anyways, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Keep talking about movies.